This is Mark Molinax. Take a deep breath, relax, and feel welcomed back. You're listening to Power for the Peaceful, a class in podcast format in which we slow dance through the 81 verses of Tao Te Ching. Today's verse treats verse 45 and is called The School of Paradox. One word of caution. There's a quote ahead from someone who uses one irreverent word.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
I love this song. No, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you'll find you get what you need. Rolling Stones.
I think it's fascinating. The band who sang I Can't Get No Satisfaction comes to the conclusion that you can't always get what you want. Welcome back, dear listeners. Today's reader and sometimes singer is Mattie Miller-Decker, who goes by Mattie. Mattie is an education consultant and mindfulness coach, and she can be found at www.hidasta.com, Hidasta. Hidasta is the Finnish word for slowing down. Mattie describes herself this way.
I've been an educator all my life, and I now am continuing as a retired professor of education. I'm a nature and forest therapy guide here in the western North Carolina mountains of the Hickory Nut Gorge. And I'm also a Zen practitioner as well as an Episcopal oblate in a community of sisters in Cincinnati.
Let me ask you to think with me, imagine with me, the universe as a Rorschach blot test. You know, those ink blots on a piece of paper that appear at first to be a chaotic jumble, but then, as we examine it more, as something familiar? It could look like a bat with outstretched wings or a pair of human lungs. Most folks see people, flowers, and butterflies in the ink blots. Lesson number 1. As we perceive the universe, or whatever we focus upon with our 5 senses, all feeding into that one great sense called our brain, the universe in our awareness appears at first to our perception-gathering senses as one huge, undifferentiated Rorschach blot. And as we feed all that blurry data through the brain's filters that we and our cultures have installed in our perception-gathering toolkits, there inevitably comes a recognizable image. And that's what our brains do. Most of the time, though, our perceptions are incomplete, but our brains interpret the data as complete with its presets of what is real, trustworthy, or true. You see, our brains are supremely efficient or else enormously lazy, and these brains try to fill in the empty or undefined spaces of the unexplained universe with its own preset definitions of what it lazily assumes is out there. The brain has already arranged meanings of the meaningless and random universe and gives us certainty or assurance of its authority when it's actually throwing out options and possibilities at us just to see what will stick. Lesson number 2. In our explanations of strange perceptions, we must allow room for ambiguity, paradox, and uncertainty because our brains are wired for swift conclusions that arrive as or seem like comprehensive and very assuring conclusions. These uncertainties seem clear or obvious in our brains. An example you can search for on your device right now is called The Treachery of Images by French Impressionist painter René Magritte. The caption for this smoking pipe depicted in the art is, Ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. To put it mildly, thanks to our cultures and our socializations, we each have these metaphorical virtual reality goggles between us and the world. And as we both receive into and project out of our own private VR impressions of the world, is a world that seems to make sense. At least we hope they do. But these sensations and impressions are as unique to us, as unique as every wave on the ocean since, like, forever. In our sober moments, we must conclude that we manufacture our own realities, hallucinations actually, through the filters in our brains, and from these fabricated maps of the world, we try to encounter the universe as it actually is. But does our perception equal reality? Our brains create our senses of what is real from our fabricated notions, to sum up this introduction, which is quite different from the world or the state of things as they actually exist. Which is why I feel this verse 45 is a great reminder to us notion-making, hallucination-generating, mirage-producing human beings. What Taoism teaches is how to question and perhaps replace our own virtual reality goggles with reality goggles. Taoism is a mirage-busting spirituality. In its practices, we learn to trim down our mirages and slowly replace them with what is actually there, actually true, and with authentic processes actually working themselves out right under our noses. For Tao is ultimately, to us human beings, how to be the nature that we already are, and how to be the natural person we even now are already, in each and in every circumstance. Tao teaches us over and over again, this time in verse 45, how to embrace the difficult places our brains do not like to go, that is, the ambiguous and the paradoxical. Why? To quieten our hypnotized minds, so then we can perceive and then rejoin Tao, which is already around and already within us. To do this, maybe we need to learn how to mistrust the senses and practice becoming more expert in distinguishing our superstitions from reality in order to receive a more correct understanding of reality. As the German philosopher Novalis taught in his fascinatingly titled book, The Experience of the Foreign, he wrote, "Educate the senses to see the ordinary as extraordinary, the familiar as strange, the mundane as sacred, the finite as infinite." Or as Tao Te Ching verse 56 would put it, "Those with answers do not know, and those who know do not answer. Seal the mouth. Mistrust your senses." So Taoism teaches us how to educate our senses to see reality through roundabout ways, like Wu Wei's reverse logic at the end of verse 42, which says, "Your fate may be only to gain by losing, or to lose by gaining." Today's verse 45 teaches us this roundabout practice of the senses through paradoxes. So Mattie, please read our verse 45 for this episode.
Verse 45, disguised. Even in great perfection, though surface blemishes appear, function is never impaired, nor usefulness exhausted. Even if great abundance appears empty, when used, it is bottomless. So great things appear in caricature. Great skill veils itself as bumbling. Great eloquence begins as spluttering. Activity ends the cold. Stillness stops the heat. All creation begins in original quietness. Perfect stillness and serenity govern creation.
Paradox. I count 9 of them in this verse. The paradox The welcoming mind helps us to awaken up to neglected truths. Paradox and its non-identical twin, ambiguity, question what we sense as reality, interrogate what we feel is solid ground. For Taoism's pedagogy, that is how it teaches, is often to act like a trickster, to soften up our hard lines of belief, asking us, really? Are you sure of that which you see and taste and hear and touch and remember as reality? Are your senses giving you the complete picture, the whole enchilada that we just pretend that we know? Okay, what's a paradox? A paradox is a situation or statement that seems impossible or is difficult to understand because it presents two seemingly opposite facts or characteristics. Paradoxes run counter to those expectations generated by the lazy brain. You know, those images that come across as common sense, those publicly shared agreements we feel binds us all to a single one worldview. Paradoxes teaches us with interrupting suspicions that things are not like we perceive. Things are even different from what we expect.
While he never had the sense of home so much as when he felt he was going there, it was only when he got there that his homelessness began. Thomas Wolfe, You Can't Go Home Again.
Taoism teaches a curriculum of paradox. My former dean at Union Seminary in New York wrote,
if we are to have genuine dialogue across the boundaries of our religious communities, then we must educate in ways that enable people to be clear and ambiguous, rooted and adaptive, particular and pluralistic. We might call this education for paradox. Mary Boyce.
So Taoism is an education, a curriculum of paradox. We have our expectations, and then they are to be dashed with doses of sometimes difficult measures of reality. That someone was not to leave us, someone was not to die, and yet we work so hard to get stability, to get a lifestyle we want. And then we expect, and then we act as if someone or something is perennial and never to change. But things do change. Everything changes, often in upending ways. And so we have to relearn what we thought we had learned or unlearned, or else we perish.
We must continually learn to unlearn much that we have learned, and learn to learn that which we have not been taught. Only thus do we grow. R.D. Lang.
One great paradox that I think happens to us all is an idea from Professor Barry Schwartz, professor of social theory and social action at Swarthmore College. He calls it the paradox of choice. Like when you walk into the big box store and there are not 5 or 6 kinds of salad dressing, but hundreds. And then you're more likely to freeze instead of choose.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Though the characters yin and yang are not present in this verse, they do reverberate throughout it. Things turn into their seemingly opposite. Every light casts a shadow. Life depends upon things dying. A wave has both a crest and a trough. The great has its place as much as the small. Perfection has its blemishes. Abundance seems empty. Great things or great skill appear like cartoons. But in their apparent foolishness lie wisdom and truth. Our Western worldviews are rarely not patient enough to view the caricatures as greatness, nor bumbling as a tool of the skillful, nor how eloquence contains spluttering. Jesus' ideas of strength through weakness, or love for enemy, correspond to this verse's intents. Achilles in Homer's Iliad has his heel. Of course he does. He needs it, or else he would not be Achilles. Among us, I remind us, who are already perfected by Tao, we can still walk with limps and wounds, but still be perfected. To our making things simple minds and brains, the processes of yin and yang seem mutually incompatible. To attain their climaxing points, both, however, advance by increments, little by little, a principle that implies a steady progression and a steady retirement over a long span of time. Like the darkness of night is slowly replaced. Like the darkness of night that is slowly replaced by the light of day. By such a long and protracted process, cold is on the way to becoming heat, and high is on the way to becoming low. We can see these processes speeding up, however, when we consider music and speech. For speech to be speech and music to be music, notice how we exchange sound with silence. Short pauses and sounds separate the sounds to make them intelligible. Sounds need the silence, otherwise it's just one long noise. What a paradox it is to recognize that our favorite sounds rely upon silence, just to make them intelligible. Tao Te Ching teaches that seemingly opposites are not meant to be sundered or separated, but are part, each of them, a process whereby balance occurs in a natural and intertwined way. So paradox. The value in knowing that by paradox nature works teaches us that we have little power to manipulate, to outwit, or to control nature overall. The subtle blessing here may be that knowing how life's game plays out enables us all to take the game of life somewhat less seriously, meaning when you know an activity is actually an emerging game rather than some serious and settled life process, you're able to move about freely in the game. Why? Because you can't help experience somewhat less fear, simply because you see life as a dynamic creation, a recreation, an interplay of actions and non-actions, sights and lack of sights, sounds and silence. So that ease makes freezing up in the game of life less likely. You're more able to go with the flow, as they say. Sometimes you are the activity that ends the cold. Sometimes you experience how stillness stops the heat. The education of paradox shows how
all creation begins in original quietness, perfect stillness, and serenity govern creation.
So what this verse cautions against, then, are our preset dispositions that somehow more is better. Or when we use desire as a method to gain, we start to lose. All this leads us back to verse 1's famous paradoxes. Any track one can walk is no path for the eternal way. Not desiring is the only way to glimpse this mystery. Desiring, all one sees are husks and appearances.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
The poles of a paradox are like the poles of a battery. Hold them together, they generate the energy of life. Pull them apart, and the current stops flowing. Parker Palmer.
So what are some everyday paradoxes that remind us to look more deeply, more playfully, and see reality more as it actually is? We can start with yin-yang's truths. There's a hidden but necessary side to all things. You know that tough he-male? He has a soft side somewhere. The adult still has a child in there somewhere. The dark night contains pinpricks of starlight. Things seem darkest before the dawn. Emphasis on seem. Those who fear something, like death, get ruled by it. Other examples of paradox. That so-so looking dessert could be the best tasting, and vice versa. You know that student who seems lazy and sleepy and out of touch? That may be the surprising super student. Speaking of superpowers, Superman, Batman, and Green Hornet each have their hidden appearances, their alter egos, even their weaknesses, which, when combined with their superpower selves, creates an integrated hero, though a hero who may limp. In music, harmony is harmony only after a period of tension that anticipates that harmony. The human is divine. The divine is human. The more connected we are electronically, the more lonely we feel. Stoop to conquer. A teacher mentor of mine, Will Campbell, once counseled, the best way to neutralize an organization is to give it respectability. The powerless or the ridiculous ones turn out to be the real movers and shakers of power. Galadriel phrases this truth in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Even the smallest person can change the course of the future, she said. Religions contain its paradoxes too. Christianity teaches that the way to save one's life is to lose it. The first shall be last. A virgin becomes a mother of some homeless baby who is to lead people home. God is experienced as a far-off deity, and yet as close as one's neighbor. In the Hebrew scriptures, the human being is created from dust, yet also in the divine image.
The wolf shall live with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion will feed together, and a little child shall lead them. Isaiah 11:6.
Zen teachers claim they have nothing to teach because these teachings, one's Buddha nature, they're already yours. Here's some more ambiguous paradoxes. All life feeds upon the death of something. Great things appear as caricature. Small things contain that necessary seed of greatness. Think about that the next time you encounter a small child. As Joseph Campbell taught, where you stumble, there your treasure lies. And finally, one of the greatest paradoxes I have learned in my studies is by Ernest Becker from his award-winning book, The Denial of Death. Just 5 words tell us of a supreme paradoxes. We are gods who shit. I can't stop meditating on that one paradox and its power. In every paradox, the ordinary and the extraordinary are paired and handshake with each other to make equals out of inequalities and become wholes out of their parts.
When I approach custom officials or the police, I smile, happy, because no one can discover the divine contraband I carry with me, that invisible passenger whose very discreet presence only the eyes of angels can detect. Dom Helder Kamara. Some people are like sugarcane. Even when crushed in the mill, completely squashed, reduced to pulp, all they can yield is sweetness. Dom Helder Kamara.
I think the point is made. We can get blinded by half-truths, half-realities, and we need the paradox of their other halves to know the real. To remain ignorant of the whole reality is to remain childish, which is very different from remaining childlike. We need the education of the paradox, as modeled by the yin and the yang, to return to our natural Taoist selves.
Don't ever bet against paradox. It'll always win. Tom Robbins.
And now let us hear Mattie's question, a question that pretty much ripped me open.
My question is, isn't this verse really about beginner's mind? Inviting us to experience our true nature? I'm reminded of Jesus' parables, contradictions, opening to deep truth. Walt Whitman's Do I Contradict Myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. I also thought of Albert Einstein's words, if you want to understand a thing, study its opposite.
Oh my goodness, Mattie. This is so beautifully phrased. And your question helps me, and I hope others, to make more connections with Tao from within our lives and experiences together. Now, originally, beginner's mind in Zen Buddhism was the idea that the more one practiced the martial arts or even calligraphy, a paradox would occur. Because the more you practice something, the more the quality of one's martial arts or calligraphy could actually suffer. How's that? Because you become, in your mind, an expert. Okay. Beginner's mind is to be contrasted with the expert mind. The expert mind tells us, in reassuring tones, mind you, that the reality right in front of our noses is a repeat, a reappearance of something we hallucinate has already happened before. But in beginner's mind, with and within each task or new encounter, we enter into it as if we had never done it before. We get off our brain's really superb skill of autopilot, in which we assume that whatever new context we're in, it's one we have encountered, maybe countless times before. Nothing new here this time. Nothing here new in this space or situation, the brain will tell us. So shift your focus to what you've already learned and experienced. Because the brain assures us that you've been here before, so there's nothing new to learn, see, embrace. Just exert the least possible energy in the situation because you've been here and you've done that. But beginner's mind, as a spiritual practice, acts like a firewall against the hubris and the closed-mindedness often associated with thinking of oneself as an expert. You know that thinking we do in front of others and ourselves, that goes like this: watch me, I got this. In other words, by not practicing a beginner's mind, we discount and dismiss the beginner's undistorted genius of conceiving reality in favor of the expert or the experienced person's ready-made preset answers. But the expert is not tuning in to the uniqueness and the possibilities of being available to reality itself. And as your question implies, Mattie, when we practice beginner's mind, we are invited to experience our true nature, rooted in Tao already, because we can empty our cluttered mind about all those plans and schemes of our hypnotic ego and allow the emergence of the utter uniqueness of the moment and then experience again and again the deepest truths of our utter simplicity. So the embracing of paradox is actually good medicine for our ego-assisted maladies. For in paradoxes, we understand the limits and the limitations of our fixed opinions, the inflexibility of our so-called expert minds that thinks it has all the information it ever needs. So the practice of paradox is a royal road to our deepest selves, for paradox points to our customized path to how we may unseparate our tangled selves and ego from what is real. For we all have our hardened opinions, our ways, our set ways of seeing, our habits of trying to make our preferences and desires into some forced reality. Beginner's mind softens these, whispering, "There's another way to see, a better way. Don't dwell in your customized conspiracies and preset thinking habits." Because what happens when we see with fresh eyes and hear with virgin ears and think with beginner's mind, what happens? We stop hallucinating what we call reality, and we learn to pay attention to the real, to the hurting world, to the injustices just outside our narrow but ignorant views. Pay attention to hurting people or traumatized creation needing our compassion, because there's something at stake in this verse, because there's something at stake in the universe. Lao Tzu in this verse requests that we mindfully examine whatever it is we call reality or necessary or certainty to see if we are living in our private hallucinations or in reality. Now, agnosticism, or the don't know mind, the beginner's mind, is the beginning of wisdom. Why? Because agnosticism's distinctive mark is this radical honesty about one's capacity to know. Not knowing is an empty place, a Tao womb, not a Tao tomb, where true knowledge begins, because we drop the language game that pretends that we can know our way into reality on the poverty of just our past experiences. With this not knowing attitude and emptiness in our minds, then we are most prepared to apprehend a mystery now and here. Taoism's equivalent is this: to be filled, one must become first empty, empty of mind, concepts, expectations, and results. Trying to name or to locate Tao with word fillers, you find you're just chasing wind. It is this very practice of verse 45's curriculum of paradox that brings us closer, and I think faster, to the true nature of reality and of our deepest selves, because both reality and our deepest selves are Tao. And when they connect, there is the power for peace. So, Mattie, this verse provides a strong refresher about our total agnosticism about Tao. When agnostic about our own ideas about reality, when we lower our egos and expectation, no matter one's spirituality, we empty ourselves of the world's chatter and our chatter, both of which are tireless and incessant. Emptied of that noisy noise, we can then listen with our psychic centers focused upon this hurting, neglected world. And empty of our self-hypnosis, of our egotism, this makes us useful. See verses 5 and 11 for how emptiness is useful. Finally, in Western thought, there's a similar concept. It's called the curse of knowledge. For example, in a classroom setting, teachers may have difficulty if they cannot put themselves in the position of a student. Or a doctor may suffer in her or his practice of medicine when they cannot see or place themselves in the position of a patient. A knowledgeable professor or doctor might no longer remember the difficulties of what it means to be a young student learning a new subject for the first time, or what a patient may be undergoing in the course of their newly diagnosed disease. Whether you call it beginner's mind or curse of knowledge, the teaching's the same. Too much familiarity with what we call real or life tends to deaden our in-the-moment experiences of living, and we get dull and bored. And that boredom with the same old deadens our curiosity, creativity, our connections. And whatever is real and authentic in that moment gets crowded out by our bored, dulled minds who think, yeah, we've seen this before. So, Mattie, did we get close to the mark on your question? Do you have any additional thoughts, ideas, questions, or even corrections?
No. Honestly, I found that just pure delight and grateful for this work. I've been studying the Tao Te Ching. I went through a series of reading it every morning, and it works on you like water on a rock. It's just really in me now. And to hear your words about paradox really sing in my heart. I just feel great hope. As you spoke, I thought of the world situation we're in right now. It just seems hopeless, and it seems that there's no way out. And there it is. There's the paradox. Somewhere there's gold in them thar hills, somehow there's something very rich in all of us awaiting in the present moment. So thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and thank you for being here. I'll just respond one thing to what you said is, and that's with Rebecca Solnitz's work, Hope in the Dark. And she makes the great case for the paradox of hope that emerges in the strangest places and the craziest of situations. So always be ready to be surprised by hope. All right, Mattie, I am so glad to know you and to get you here and your voice. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. This podcast is an original labor of love, written and co-produced by many, whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching is good news for today. Tao still speaks. Thanks to Mattie Miller-Decker for your voice and question. Artwork is provided by the indomitable Audrey Davis. The song, Put Your Roots Down, is graciously donated by singer and songwriter Molly Hartwell. The copyright for quotations from Tao Te Ching is held by Fortress Press. May your days begin in peace and become wombs for radical hope.
When you're listening, are you listening?